I don't want to cross that line, but all I will say is there was no majority for this decision at all. And if they're not working for us, they're working against us, guys. I mean, we have to wake up to this. I mean, we have to hold people accountable. Coeur d'Alene just had a shooting where we attacked our firemen. People need to stand up to these monsters and stop freaking bowing down to them and giving them childcare. I mean, prison is nothing but adult childcare. You get free vision, you get free dental, you get free meals, you get AC, room and board, cable TV, internet access. It's ridiculous what we give our prisoners. Better than what we treat our vets. Our vets coming back from war with missing limbs. This is unacceptable.
Bryan Kohberger, the accused killer of 4 University of Idaho students, is expected to plead guilty tomorrow, bypassing the death penalty and forever altering the pursuit of justice for Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. This deep dive is going to unpack the pros and cons of accepting a plea in a death penalty case, examining Idaho's victim rights laws, and questioning whether the families were fairly included in this life-altering decision. We'll think about questions like, why are there some victim families that are outraged while others appear to be accepting the plea? And could one dissenting vote have blown up this whole negotiation? Was justice served, or was it just silenced? Well, hey everybody, welcome to Profiling Evil. Hey, I want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to dig into the facts, the behaviors, and the deeper patterns that go unforeseen in true crime stories. Now, if you're new here, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. Give us a like, a thumbs up, and share this episode with somebody who cares about truth and justice as much as you do. Now tonight we're going to head back up to Moscow, Idaho, a town that should be known for college living and quiet mountain mornings, not murder. But we just learned that Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of killing those 4 innocent students in 2022, plans to plead guilty. That means no jury, no trial, and in this case, no death penalty. So what on earth happened, and why did the state of Idaho make this deal? Why weren't all of the victim families in agreement on the decision? And is life in prison enough when you've taken 4 lives? Now, this breaking news hit like a gut punch for a lot of people. News that Kohberger is expected to plead guilty to the brutal murders of the 4 students. Yeah, this is the same guy who was supposed to be facing the death penalty. The guy who once declared he wanted to be found not guilty, but now apparently he's ready to admit to it all. But the bigger question, the one that we need to explore, is this. Is it a good idea for the state of Idaho to accept this kind of a plea deal? Or should they have rolled the dice and taken him to trial, risking the possibility of loss and, in the end, ultimate punishment? Well, I've been chewing on this one, and let me tell you, it is complicated. On one hand, getting a guilty plea means convictions on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. That's big. It means that the families, the community, and law enforcement, people who have poured their hearts into this case, get a guaranteed outcome. There's no trial to drag through, no possibility of a mistrial, no appeals that will pop up for the next 30 years. Now, Reuters reported that this plea would result in life without parole, period. That's what the document says. That kind of certainty is gold, frankly, in the justice system, especially in high-profile cases where a single technical error could unravel everything. But even with Kohberger's promise that he won't appeal the convictions, what happens when he changes his mind? perhaps after sitting in prison for years, maybe decades. Will this case also turn into a spectacle like we've been witnessing in the softening positioning of the Menendez brothers, or attempts to now get Ghislaine Maxwell out of prison for grooming young girls to be sexually assaulted by Jeffrey Epstein? I mean, that's the possibility here. From a law enforcement perspective and from a victim advocacy perspective, it's deeply unsettling, even unacceptable. Just to imagine that somebody like Kohberger, who's accused of this calculated, close contact murders of 4 young people, the possibility that he could ever have less than life without parole is really unsettling. Yet we've seen this tide shift in some disturbing ways. And I want to talk about the Menendez brothers, for example. They were convicted in the 1990s for the shotgun murders of their parents. They were originally sentenced to life without parole. But now, decades later, there's renewed public sympathy, online campaigns, and legal action aimed at revisiting their convictions based on alleged abuses they endured and evolving social attitudes. And whether one believes their sentence should be reconsidered or not, the fact remains they were given life without parole, and now they're getting another day in court. And then there's Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted for grooming girls to be sexually exploited by Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, there's already chatter, both in legal circles and media speculation, that she could pursue a reduced sentence down the road based on her so-called cooperation or changes in prison conditions or evolving standards about how we assess culpability in trafficking conspiracies. The idea that someone so complicit in such horror could seek a lighter sentence even after conviction, in my opinion, is a slap in the face to survivors and justice alike.
Yeah, Mike, do you think we'll see any of those habeas corpus or anything like that down the road, Mike? I'm looking at the Menendez brothers walking out soon. I mean, there's a difference, and there's a difference between your life. Life on death row is different than life. It is a different life. These people who get life in prison, it's a life. They wake up in the morning, they look forward to something. It's not the life that any of us want to live or should live, but it is a life. And there's a socialization process. They look forward to things. I mean, it's a different scenario. And by the way, they'll file motions anyway.
You're absolutely right. And this is the disturbing part with how we're changing now. We somehow forget that justice ruled and said, never again are you going to walk free. And then we see something like what's going on with the Menendez brothers. So what about Kohberger? I mean, that's what's keeping so many people awake at night right now. Once this guy's sentenced to life, the assumption is that's it. But let's be honest. Life doesn't always mean life. Legal precedents shift, correctional policies change, governors grant clemency, and courts revisit sentences based on anything from mental health standards to overcrowding to procedural loopholes. I have no idea how many people were released during the coronavirus campaign and the pandemic, but it impacted correctional facilities. And that's why the death penalty, as controversial as it is, always has carried symbolic and practical weight in cases like this. I mean, it's the ultimate guarantee that somebody like Kohberger will never again breathe fresh air as a free man. Removing that option through a plea deal takes the certainty off the table, and it leaves the door open, even just a crack, for future leniency. You know, I took a pretty hard line on court TV saying that this guy should never have a second chance, not after what he did. Because when we see killers re-entering the public discourse, when they're filing appeals or even walking free, the message to victims and survivors is devastating.
Yeah. Mike King, what are your thoughts tonight? Where's your head at right now?
I'll tell you, I sure didn't see this coming, Vinny, and I'm really glad to be on with Grace and with Joe Scott tonight. because we've been talking about this case for a long time. I guess I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate with a caveat, and that caveat is, you know how I feel about the victims of crime and the families and the victims' rights bills that have become established over the years, something that we fought so hard for back in the 90s when I was at the district attorney and then at the attorney general's office. But on the flip side of this, I'm really glad that they're able to secure 4 first-degree felony convictions, and hopefully that burglary will be added on top of it. The question becomes, why didn't the families know more? And were they really brought into the mix and discussed? Because prosecutors across the board are taught, or at least asked, to reason with the families. And usually the families will come back, even knowing that they would prefer the same eye for eye kind of resolution in a criminal case. But you do hear these families who say, I'm so tired of listening for decades this case brought up over and again as someone goes through the appeals process. If I know that he doesn't have a chance to ever appeal, if I know he's never going to walk out of the prison, that's good enough for a lot of families. But the families deserve to be involved. And I think that's what's got us also incredibly disturbed right now, and something that I hope the state of Idaho comes back and answers, and that those families are able to acknowledge, yeah, we had a chance to be a part of this decision process.
Yeah.
This killer of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin wasn't just an impulsive monster. This was committed by a strategic, calculating manipulator. And that's not going to end by simply locking him up. He's going to continue to work the system, and he's going to continue to work in the system. If not overseen by vigilance, it might let him win somewhere down the road. Hey folks, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and I wanted to take a moment to invite you to join me at CrimeCon Denver. It's in September, and you won't want to miss this. If you love true crime and you love hanging out with people that like true crime, you ought to come and enjoy the 6,000 plus people that come to CrimeCon and take part in this amazing event. And to make it a little easier, I've worked out a deal with CrimeCon to give you a special discount on your registration. So when you go to registration, make sure you enter the code word KING, K-I-N-G, my last name, and that'll get you a discount on CrimeCon. And I look forward to seeing you there. Hey, by the way, bring your books, and I'll make sure to sign them while we're there, and we'll get some pictures together. Hey, we'll see you soon at CrimeCon. So let's pause right here and explore what we mean when we talk about plea agreements in legal terms. Because a plea agreement, or this plea bargain, is essentially a negotiated deal between the defense and the prosecution. The defendant's going to agree to plead guilty to certain charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, and in this case, to avoid the death penalty. Now, once that plea is entered, it still has to be accepted by the court, and judges are not obligated to follow the terms of the agreement, although typically, if both sides have consented, the judge is going to go along with it. Now, these deals can be a strategic tool to avoid the risks of the resource demands of a trial, but they're not without controversy, especially when the crime in question is as heinous as this one is. But here's the other side of that coin. Some of the victims' families, especially the Goncalves family, are absolutely devastated, if not angered, by this plea deal. They feel blindsided, like the rug was pulled out from underneath them. In fact, Kaylee Goncalves' family called the agreement shocking and cruel, arguing that Kohberger, who allegedly planned, stalked, and executed the students, deserves nothing less than death. And frankly, you can understand that feeling, can't you? I mean, what kind of justice is it when the man who butchered your child is now given the opportunity to live, to eat, to go to the commissary, to participate in prison programs, and possibly even continue his education? And that idea sparked a big conversation on court TV when I sat down with Vinnie Politan. Vinny said something that kind of struck me. He said, if not this guy, then who? and it's a fair question. Kohberger doesn't qualify for the death penalty, then who would? I mean, this wasn't a crime of passion or impulse. Again, this was meticulously planned, and it was an ambush. And yet, here we are, looking at a deal that removes capital punishment from the table. So let's dig a little deeper. Why would the state of Idaho, one of the few states still actively pursuing capital punishment, and frankly even bringing back the firing squad, choose not to go after the death penalty here? Well, some of it boils down to the sheer cost and time involved in a case like this. Death penalty cases are long, complicated, expensive, and ugly at times. Appeals can stretch for decades. Prosecutors were probably looking at the mountain of evidence that they'd have to present, the forensic challenges, the jury selection in such a high-profile case, and they decided that securing 4 guaranteed life sentences was a safer bet. And frankly, how do you argue with that? ABC News and others have pointed out that prosecutors, though, apparently didn't make this decision in a vacuum. According to what others are reporting, they did talk to the families. They sent letters, held meetings, but apparently not all the families were on board. And here's where it gets tricky. Under Idaho's victim rights laws, victims are entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. They have a right to be informed about and to be present at criminal proceedings, including plea negotiations. But here's the critical nuance. The law mandates consultation, but not consent. The state is obligated to notify the victims and allow them to share their input, but it doesn't require the state to get their approval to finalize the deal. And this legal distinction can be really painful in these kinds of cases. Families might believe that they have veto power, but in practice, the final decision rests with the prosecuting attorney and then the judge. They're the ones that have to make this thing happen. And that's part of the reason why the Goncalves family seems so upset. They might feel like their voices weren't just ignored, but more importantly, that they were irrelevant. And you have to wonder, was there a risk if they involved all families with one group member saying no, could that single group derail the entire plea negotiation? And I guess that's possible as well. I mean, that's a dilemma that no prosecutor wants to face. So do you secure guaranteed convictions and lifelong imprisonment, or do you gamble it all on principle, knowing that one juror could hold out, or that an appeal, even down the road, could somehow undo everything? Idaho law also provides for the possibility of restitution and victim impact statements, and those families are going to have a chance to speak when sentencing is finalized. But that doesn't erase the sting of what they're feeling, this being left out of the process, and that truly matters. The decision to remove death from the table is something that they felt like they should have had more say on. But according to the law, they don't. Now on the show, I mentioned a conversation that I had with a killer named Dan Lafferty, a man who murdered a woman and her baby, another case that haunted my state of Utah. Now Lafferty, once locked away in solitary, is now living in general population. Why? Because the prison system's trying to make room, to reduce pressure. I mean, this thing is horrifying, but it's happening. And now Bryan Kohberger, the guy who studied criminal behavior, who created questionnaires about how killers feel during their crimes. I mean, imagine him sitting in general population, using prison as a kind of live research lab. That's not justice. Frankly, it's chilling.
Yeah, Mike, do you think we'll see any of those habeas corpus or anything like that down the road, Mike? I'm looking at the Menendez brothers walking out soon. I mean, there's a difference, and there's a difference between your life. Life on death row is different than life. It is a different life. These people who get life in prison, it's a life. They wake up in the morning, they look forward to something. It's not the life that any of us want to live or should live. but it is a life, and there's a socialization process. They look forward to things. I mean, it's a different scenario. And by the way, they'll file motions anyway.
You're absolutely right. And this is the disturbing part with how we're changing now. We somehow forget that justice ruled and said, never again are you going to walk free. And then we see something like what's going on with the Menendez brothers. I had a phone call just recently with an inmate that was serving in the hole, life in prison, down in the hole with 1 hour of out time per day. A guy named Dan Lafferty, who murdered a mother and her little baby in a case that I worked on and I've talked about a lot. And Dan told me just the other day that he's now out in general population because things have gotten hard on the correctional system. They're trying to loosen up, free up more space. That is absolutely unacceptable. And for a family who lost a child, and here we have 4 children that were lost as a result of a killer, to be told, hey, we're going to now give this guy commissary. We're going to give him a chance to go out and hang out in the yard and participate in prison programs, maybe even continue working on his education. That's incredibly offensive when this individual will apparently plead guilty to murdering savagely their children.
Yeah, and who knows? You know, you get some justices who see the world a little bit differently. 30 years down the road, all of a sudden, life without parole is cruel and unusual punishment.
And it brings us back to the philosophical and ethical dilemma that we face in cases like this. Is it better to guarantee justice with a lockdown plea, or to go all in for the death penalty and risk losing it all? The families are torn. The community's watching. The legal experts are weighing every word. And the rest of us, those like you and me who care about justice and truth, are just left wondering if this was the right call. And personally, I think that it was, although I can see how painful this thing is for the survivors.
You know, it's funny that Mike King had mentioned that he has an opportunity to pursue his education in prison, and he certainly does. I mean, he was a student of crime, and his thesis involved studying criminals and how and why they did things. And he had a very detailed questionnaire before it was taken down, asking questions about, you know, how criminals felt when they committed the crime, and there was like a rating system, whether they felt guilty or not. So he has a fascination for pursuing that kind of knowledge. And I can't help but think, but once he's in prison, he almost has this entire prison environment as his lab to continue his studies and to pursue that. And there's nothing that's stopping him from doing that once he's incarcerated.
Yeah, unless you're on death row, then you're by yourself. And you're
Well, there's one thing I know for sure. The families deserve better communication. Now, if the state was going to strike a deal, they owed it to every parent, sibling, loved one to bring them into the loop early and honestly. And I'm not saying that that didn't happen, but the reaction of one of those families makes me wonder. So even if the final call wasn't theirs to make, they should have at least had a seat at the table, and I really hope they did. And I want to think that they did. The state's decision might have been strategic. It might have even been legally sound. But morally, it just feels like something's missing, doesn't it? Well, as we continue to follow this story, I'll be diving deeper into what this means for justice, how victims' rights are truly being honored, and whether our system is evolving in ways that serve public safety or, frankly, erode it. And we'll continue that conversation on places like Court TV and beyond here on Profiling Evil, because these are the moments that define how we as a society are going to respond to evil. I really liked Mark Garagos' statement on News Nation with my friend Ashley Bamfield. It was incredibly powerful, and I wanted to replay just a few minutes of that.
I get the raw emotion. I get that, and I understand nobody. Nobody's going to second guess anybody who's had the unthinkable happen to them. So I understand that. Yeah. At the same time, please, why put Why go through this just to have a jury say the same thing and then have to listen? If you're the guy, let me tell you what would end up happening. You get to a guilty verdict in the phase. You then get to a penalty phase, and you have to listen to mitigation evidence. If you're the victim at that point, and that's a legal conclusion, the victim, because somebody's been found guilty, you don't want to hear a litany of mitigation evidence about somebody who has been found guilty of killing your loved one. I can't think of anything worse. I don't want to hear about all the good things or all the problems or this or that. I just want the person gone. And I think there is some closure with somebody standing up and taking responsibility. And I think that with some hindsight that, and I remember, Ashley, you tell me, when we first talked about this, some of the victims' families were on your show saying that they were not supportive of the death penalty. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, stay with us, because this story is far from over. As we wrap up this episode, I want to take a moment to say thanks again. You know, justice isn't always clean. It isn't always satisfying. And sometimes, like we've seen in this case, justice can take a form that leaves us with more questions than answers. Bryan Kohberger might spend the rest of his life behind bars, but the wounds left on these families, this community, our collective sense of safety run deep. And what disturbs me the most about this case is what it teaches us, once again, about how predators operate. Kohberger, if he truly pleads guilty, didn't just snap. He studied. He watched. He selected. And then he executed the plan with chilling precision. This is the kind of offender that I've spent my career studying. And it's exactly why I wrote the book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. And I want to just evolve into that for a moment, because in that book, it's a brand new book that I've just released, I unpack the psychological and behavioral patterns of predators just like this guy. I talk about how they choose their victims, how they manipulate their environments, and how they leave behind clues at the crime scene, in their communications, and in their behavior long before and long after an attack ever happens. So if you're disturbed by what's happened in Idaho and you want to better understand how people like Bryan Kohberger think, how they act, and how they exploit the vulnerable, I invite you to read my book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, because understanding evil is the first step in stopping it. And you can get your copy at profilingevil.com. You just go to the store, or profilingevil.com/wolves. Or for those of you who live internationally, you can get it anywhere in the world through Amazon. And if you already have it, thanks for buying it. Share it with somebody you care about, because the more we know, the safer we become. Hey, watch for Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like audio podcasts, make sure that you're checking out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And please hit that like and subscribe button and share Profiling Evil with your friends. And from all of us at Profiling Evil, we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.